This is July 27th, 28th, whatever it is.
28.
1991, and we're here at Lane Place in Crawfordsville, Indiana. This is one of a series of interviews of World War II veterans that the Montgomery County Historical Society is doing. We have had the assistance of the Byron Cox Post of the American Legion and also the Veterans of Foreign Wars and the Heritage Alliance. This being the 50th anniversary of the start of World War II. These tapes that we're making of veterans of World War II are going to be placed in the Crawfordsville Public Library for the use of the public. They are to be the property of the Montgomery County Historical Society. Also, one tape will be given to each person who is interviewed. This idea stemmed from that recent series on the Civil War, when the veterans of the Battle of Gettysburg assembled on the 50th anniversary of that battle at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, both men from the North and the South. And these old men with beards fraternized together and enjoyed each other's company. Told stories of what happened to them in the war. Now, today, this is another one of our series, and I'm going to turn to you. Give us your name.
My name is William B. Clark, and I live here in Waynetown. However, I was born and raised at Sullivan, Indiana.
At where?
At Sullivan, Indiana.
Sullivan.
Yes.
And what was the date of your birth?
My date of birth was March 1st, 1918.
And what was your background? Were you brought up on a farm, or what was the...
Yes, I was brought up on a farm, where at the time we didn't think we had much money, but we sure had good eats. That's one of the things that a local doctor down there contributed to the possibility that I would make it through this ordeal that we're going to talk about.
All right. How did what the local doctor did, how did that reflect? What did he do?
Well, he knew how we were raised, the kind of diet we had, and the kind of people, we worked and whatnot. And we eat, back them days, what they call good, solid, stick to the ribs food.
And were you in good shape then, you're saying, when you entered the service?
When I went into the service, I think it's a fair statement to say I was near an Atlas.
Near what?
Like Atlas, in physical condition.
Okay.
Because, it won't take but a minute, this reason, myself and another fellow had just finished hauling 18,000 80-pound sacks of cement 85 miles over the Continental Divide in New Mexico. And we loaded them all by ourselves. Of course, we had to look to under, but we were young, 23 years old, physically fit, weighed about 165 pounds, all muscle. That's why I feel when I started this ordeal, I was as near physical fit as any fitness you ever see.
Now, when did you enter the service?
Okay. As a young man, I went west to make better money. I wound up in New Mexico working for a highway contractor there. In October of 1940, when all male in the United States had to register for the draft. We were working on a job in Comata, New Mexico. One of my friends there belonged to the New Mexico National Guard.
So you joined?
So, it took four of us in that group.
Talked you into it?
Took four of us of that, two contractors on that job, into joining the New Mexico National Guard. because they knew that they were going to be inducted into federal service for 1 year's training.
Yeah.
Hey, let's get this over with, and then we get about our business. Okay, I enlisted in the New Mexico National Guard. I don't know, I think it's about the 2nd of January 1941. And the whole Guard, New Mexico National Guard, was inducted into federal service in January the 6th, 1941.
And did you have a position? Well, what was your what were your duties in the New Mexico National Guard?
All right. I started out, of course, as a PFC, as a truck driver.
Truck driver?
Yes, truck driver. That pulled, because the New Mexico National Guard was an anti-aircraft unit. Had 3-inch anti-aircraft guns. So on January the 6th, shortly after, we was sent to El Paso, Texas, to Logan Heights, a new place they built out there, the big airfield, to train all the recruits that coming in. We spent our time from about the 10th of January in 41 until about the latter part of August in 41. And we was ordered to load up and ship out. We wound up in San Francisco, loaded on the President Coolidge ship, and wound up in Clark Field in Luzon in the Philippines.
That's the same place where they've been having the volcano.
That reminded me of that mountain. Every time I seen on TV, yes. That was because where we were stationed, you could observe that volcano every clear day.
You remember the day you got to the Philippines? When was it?
Yes, we got there October the 16th, 1941.
Were you still a PFC?
At that time, I had been moved up a little bit to corporal because I was to be a gunner on a 3-inch gun.
Uh-huh. Did you go through basic training in the States?
Yes, we went through our 13 weeks of basic training at Logan Heights at El Paso, Texas, for our training of all small arms and whatnot. And then we had practice runs of 3-inch anti-aircraft around different places in the lower part of New Mexico.
Did they stick with you? Did you continue to be anti-aircraft after you got over there, or did they change you just to plain artillery?
No, I guess the 200 was rather fortunate there. They maintained us as an anti-aircraft unit. And when war broke out, they divided the group. They come up with some more 3-inch guns someplace. And they made 2 units out of the 200. The 200th and the 515th, which I stayed with the 200.
All right. Now you got to the Philippines. Where did you land at the Philippines?
We come in at Manila. Unloaded all of our equipment at Manila.
Mm-hmm.
Transported, I don't know, to 40, 50 miles up to Clark Field.
About how many of you were there on that ship? Have any idea?
Yes, the 200th, by their own strength and filled up with draftees during the 7 months we were at El Paso, came up to full strength, 1,700 officers, men in the unit.
Now, you got to Manila, then what did you do?
We moved out to Clark Field, supposedly to set up anti-aircraft protections around Clark Field at that time. And we got set up probably the last week of November. We got the messages in there that everybody was on alert, that there was something taking place and whatnot. But really right then we were as much in the dark as a lot of people here in the United States. That's what was going to happen.
Yes. What was Clark Field like at that time? Was it were there a lot of troops already there?
No, that is one place that stands out to me. United States is one of the places, I mean, with around Clarkfield or the Philippines, we got there with too little, too late to do anything in protection or defending the Philippine islands. They were very few, just the old regulars at Clarkfield, and that was a combination of Fort Stotzenberg, was an old cavalry.
Fort what?
Fort Stotzenberg.
How do you spell it? Do you know how to spell it?
No, I don't know how to spell it. It's all I do to say it.
All right.
But it was an old cavalry unit or post, I guess before airplanes was coming in. But it was a combination between the two, Clarkfield and Fort Stotzenberg, which at this time, it's all Clarkfield and built beyond expectations of what there was even to think about them, because at that time when we arrived there, we had about a mile-long runway, to my best recollection, running east and west. The week before war broke out, we were stationed out on the far end of the runway, because at the time, the United States, besides bringing anti-aircraft in, was trying to get as many aircraft in as they could over there. But a lot of the airplanes arrived there, shipped over, without any antifreeze for their air-cooled engines, so they were useless. But anyhow, on the morning of December the 8th to us in the Philippines, when we were out on the end of the runway, the truck brought our breakfast out, and they had told us that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. Well, everything picked up right then, trying to get set up to watch for them. All the planes that was in the Philippines, I believe, left Clarkfield that morning and flew and flew and flew until every one of them was back on the ground by 12 o'clock at noon. And at 12:30, somebody looked up, over to the northwest of us. Boy, our Navy's on the ball. Look at that bunch of planes coming. There was 54, 2 Bs of 27, flying in high. Well, somebody got closer and they said, our planes don't fly with bomb bays open. And about that time, I had never heard a bomb fall, but nobody had to tell me what was coming at us.
Those were Japs.
54 of the largest Jap bombers flew over Clarkfield and pattern bombed that place, and not a shot was fired from the ground, or not a plane able to be in the air to get them.
Is that so? Well, why weren't you had that anti-aircraft there? You mean they didn't shoot at them?
We were forbid to shoot because war had not been declared against the Japs. However, when the little Jap strafing planes come in, our machine gun group, our captain ordered our machine gun group to open up on them. And he almost got court-martialed for firing on our enemy before war was declared. But that was beside the point. Anyhow, that 54 plane flew in and pattern bombed Clarkfield. There was one plane that left during that bombing, and he went right out behind this volcano that's over there now.
Pintanabo, or whatever they call it.
Whatever the name of that volcano is. But that bomber, B-17, the biggest we had, I mean, he took off down through there, just off the ground, with the ears pinned back. And the last we seen him, he was going around the volcano, where he got, I don't know to this day, if he made it or if the Jap strafer planes got him.
How much damage did the Japs do to those planes that were on the ground?
They was approximately 90% of them completely destroyed on the first bombing at Clarkfield. We had a few planes that they was able to salvage to a degree, Because see, from the planes come in on December the 8th. Clark Field was abandoned on about 26th or 7th December. So there was nothing there at the field, because at that time the Japanese had come in from the north and literally run over the island, come back to where we were at Clark Field.
Yeah. Now, who was in command in the Philippines at that time? Who was the commanding general, do you know?
Oh yes, I know very well.
Who was it?
General Douglas MacArthur.
Okay. Who was in command of your outfit?
Of the New Mexico National Guard was Colonel Charles E. Sage.
Sage, S-A-G-E?
Yeah, that's right, Sage.
All right. What happened after that December 8th bombing? You sat there helpless, and you did a little return fire on the strafing planes. Did you personally take part in that?
No, because I was a gunner on a 3-inch gun. Strafing planes would come in too low for the
You had to use a machine gun.
3-inch gun. They would come under the category of our 30 caliber machine guns.
Mm-hmm.
But they done their best. I don't recall now whether they downed it or not, but then they made themselves known, the machine gun group.
Okay. Well, what happened after that?
Well, it was very confusing, the whole conglomeration in the Philippines, in my opinion. They thought they had everything in the book worked out for war plans. And the first two failed in about an hour's bombing on December the 8th. So we were trying to keep active at Clark Field. We had a few, I guess you'd call them air raid alerts, but the Japanese had basically annihilated everything there, so there wasn't a problem to them. And the northern part of the island was being invaded by the Japs, and everything falling back and falling back.
Now, you're talking about Luzon? Or
I'm talking about the island of Luzon, yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes. And they had landed, the Japs had landed two places on the north, kept working down. The Clark Field, and then everything started to move. I believe they called it Orange, or Plan Orange. Everything would move back on the peninsula of Bataan. That way they could be Bataan helped Corregidor, and Corregidor could help Bataan. So here we are. It takes about a little better than 2 weeks, well, right at 3 weeks, to get everything moved and headed back into Bataan. So we had to come everything shove into a town, the name of Fernando, and that was the road going into Bataan. At that time it was a very backwoods, primitive road, just a gravel road, and everything was trying to choke in through this.
Just the one road is all you had to get
That's the one road going in on the east side of the Bataan.
in. And who was coming in? Who was going in?
Everybody that could move. All of the anti-aircraft units, the field artillery, the cavalry, the foot soldier, infantry. They were trying to get back in because that was supposed to be their last line of defense across the Bataan Peninsula, starting about San Fernando, across over close to what they call Subic Bay on the China side of the island. And there's everybody trying to get back in, get what they could back in there. The Japs was pushing everybody back.
Did you have to leave a lot of equipment behind you?
There was a lot, not as much equipment as there was food and medicine left behind. That was their biggest over the years, I have been very upset about the lack of organization to salvage as much food and medicine as the United States could go back in. Everybody went in there and all they had was the guns or the equipment. That, yes, there was a few half-tracks and a few tanks left up the northern part of the island beyond a river. I don't remember that river, but they had blown the bridges up before the retreating tanks and half-tracks got to it, so we just lost them literally by default there.
But after you got into Bataan, you had a lot of equipment and men and arms, but you didn't have medical supplies and food and so on. Is that what you're saying?
That is true.
All right.
I was shot off a gun on January 1st in 1942. I took a 60 caliber bullet in my right shoulder. Hospital that we had there on Bataan was nothing but a Filipino bamboo barracks. They had salvaged some of the hospital equipment out of Fort Stotzenberg, Clark Field, and hauled back in there, but it was very inadequate for what a battle hospital needs. Anyhow, I was, they set up a defense line across Bataan on the northern edge. Of course, that's being an anti-aircraft unit. They had built a small air landing place on Bataan at about halfway down on the inside. It was just across rice paddies, and we had salvaged at that time 5 P-40s. That was our Bataan Air Force, was 5 P-40s. And the Air Corps rigged up where they could hang some bombs on it. And first one thing and another, they done, most of it was reconnaissance, because there was no way that with that few planes that they could defend anything. But we were, as an aircraft unit, set up close to this little airfield to protect the airfield from Japanese bombing.
And how did you happen to get shot?
Well, as we moved, everything moving back in on Bataan, that January the 1st, from daylight, we come in and our captain said, "We've got orders to set up here at the side of the road and protect this bridge." Well, we didn't have time to dig in. We just set up on top of the ground. And here come a flight of planes over. And we opened fire, but then they had better sight on us than we had on them. Anyhow, I was firing a 3-inch gun when I got shot off the gun.
And you landed in the hospital?
I landed in the hospital. It wasn't about a week until that hospital had to be moved because the front line had...
You were still in it at the time?
I was still in it, yes. So we go further down the Bataan Peninsula, under the trees, with Army cops. That was our hospital. So I laid around there, our food was almost nothing compared to what we had been. Because of January the 1st, our food was cut to 1/3 rations. So we started our starvation diet, not under the Japs, but under the Americans on January 1st of 1942. As I said, I went back to this second hospital, stayed there for a while. I decided in my own mind that I wasn't getting better, and talked to doctors and let me go back.
Did they have any medical supplies to treat you at this hospital?
Very little medical supplies. They were very, very little.
Well, but did they have adequate doctors and medical personnel?
Well, I think they had the best doctors and nurses that you could get anywhere. They were just handicapped by not having adequate equipment to perform their duties there.
Okay. All right. Now you're down under the trees, and you decide you're not getting well.
I decided I'm going back to my outfit if I can. So when the doctor come around, I said, "Doctor, how about discharging me to go back to my company?" Well, he said, "You probably get as much care there as you can here." So he discharged me. I go down to the road and happened to run into a fellow I knew that gave me the location of Battery B at the 200th, not far from where we were talking. So I make it up to the battery, report in, and the captain looked at me and said, "Well, you go back up there by the motor pool, rest a little while, we'll talk later." So I go back under the trees where they have the motor pool. And of course all my buddies there. Next morning the first sergeant come around, and the corpsman said, "Clark, let's have a look at that shoulder, see how you are." Of course the motor pool guys had all taken the rear view mirrors off their trucks and everything. And so when he looked at it, why, he said, "Have you ever seen that?" And I said, "Nope." So of course my buddies was good and helpful.
Yeah.
They said, "Hey, just sit still." One of them got up in front of him with a big mirror, and the other got behind me and said, "Now, we're going to place these so you can see your shoulder." And when I seen that, I thought to myself, "Willie, there's one time you have played hell."
You have done what?
I had played hell after seeing
Okay.
how that wound was. It was big as the palm of my hand, as red and raw as any piece of beefsteak you've ever seen. So the corpsman, very good, he put a bandage back on it, and that afternoon the first sergeant come back down and said, "Hey, the corpsman's going to take you over to headquarters. Let them look at that." Well, we go, I don't know, it didn't seem, well, the way I felt, it seemed like a long way, but it probably wasn't over a couple of miles to the medical headquarters of 200. And they looked at it. So the best thing they had was a sulfur compound.
Sulfur-melamine.
Something to that.
Yeah.
They powdered that real good and give the corpsman something to take back. And it seemed to get him. Apparently that's what it needed, that kind of medicine. I don't know whether they didn't have it or what, but when I was in hospital I never got that. But it started healing. And I had been there, I got back to my outfit probably about the 1st of March, which had been my birthday. And I stayed up around the motor pool till I was able to get out and get a few bananas and this, that, and the other, because we had 2 guys in our outfit from the Midwest that could kill a water buffalo and skin it before you could hardly walk a city block. So my company was eating better than what I was eating in the hospital. And we eat that way until General MacArthur sent out an order that anyone caught killing the Filipino caravels would be court-martialed. Well, we still tried to bootleg a little, because we were starving to death there. And after I was there for a couple of weeks, the captain sent for me to come up or down and talk to him. He said, "We've got a problem. with gun number 4, which was a gun that I was gunner on when I was shot off, off the gun. Said the sergeant isn't able to continue. I'm going to place you in his place.
Did they promote you to sergeant?
Yes, they promoted me sergeant. And he said, well, I want you to do, and he said, no, I promoted you to sergeant. You go take the gun over. Which I thought was, he gave me good confidence. So I went up and I knew all the fellows. And we had a few close sessions to talking about this and that. And everything seemed to be going just great. We was able to perform the duties we had to do and whatnot, and get along.
Were you getting any enemy fire at that time?
Yeah, we were getting bombed again, because by that time, the front line had moved closer to us. We had no place to go, so we was trying to shoot planes over the front line, as well as protect their own setup. And with our outfit set up in a diamond shape, those little Japanese fighters was great, sneaky. Of the morning, they'd come in out of the sun. In the evening, they'd come in from the other direction, out of the sun. Almost impossible to see them slipping right in on top. So we had been giving the front line the devil with anti-aircraft fire. One of the planes decided to work us over.
One of the Japanese planes?
One of the Japanese planes had decided that we was doing the wrong thing, and he was going to come down and settle score with a bunch of guys down there with a pop gun. So we made one or two pass and miss, flying around them directly, and everybody was on the alert. And our gun setting up in a diamond shape, each gun commander had a communication system set up, headphones and what, so you could talk to one another and take the messages from the captain or lieutenant, who was the officer in charge. So when I looked up and seen the plane coming in, I hollered, take cover. Well, my gun crew left everything and went in the holes. About the time we got in the holes, the bomb dropped within about 10 feet of our gun number 4. Nobody was hurt. So when the commanding lieutenant said, anybody hurt? Nope. Gun 1 was all right, gun 2 all right, gun 3 all right, gun 4 fine. And then he said, who gave that order to take the hose? I said, I did, sir. He said, I'll have you know, I give orders at this outfit.
So you were in trouble?
I said, yes, sir. What could I say? Here, I'd made a mistake, left my mouthpiece open, and I'd give everybody an order to take the hose. Well, he said, I'll be down to talk with you. Yes, sir. When he got there, seen the bomb crater, and I've seen number 4 gun position. He said, the next time, close your mouthpiece before you give your order. I said, yes, sir, and it was fine. So I got out of that, and it's fine. So
when did you first see a Jap? Had you seen one by this time?
no, I had been in the Air Corps back behind the lines. I had not seen a Jap.
Okay.
My first Jap that I saw was April the 9th, when we had orders to surrender.
Well, I better, we're getting ahead of ourselves. And what happened after this bomb explosion on your position? What happened after that?
Well, there was no harm done, other than shook up.
No. Well, what did this was about? What date? This was in March.
No, now this was further along. I took the gun over around the 1st of March, but this was about the 6th or 7th of April.
Okay.
Because it was only 1 or 2 days after this incident that we got orders to destroy all guns that we had been ordered to surrender, which was come on April the 9th.
April 9th, you got your order
To surrender, go to all assemble in one place or in groups close to the main highway down Bataan. So we took the recoil plug, took the recoil plugs out of the 3-inch guns, fired them, which pretty well took care of any part of that gun. Destroyed the gun. Our big prime movers that we moved the guns with, the oil was drained, and the engine started, and let them clatter to a stop. Threw their guns down, took what few belongings we had left, went in groups out to a rice paddy close to the highway. And you asked, when did I see my first Jap? Was a column of tanks coming down this road shortly after noon of April the 9th and stopped where we were. And then their infantry come up and put us all in groups. Started our...
Did they keep your unit together?
No. There was no one kept together. We were scattered from hell to breakfast in all directions. Each person trying to take care of their own, protect their own self, because it was nothing but a disorganized madhouse of a surrender, now that I look back on it.
What personal property did you have? What property did you have in your possession as the Japs arrived?
Okay, I think my own personal property was a small duffel bag with a change of clothes, with my mess kit, of course my billfold and ID card or dog tags, watch and rings, just personal effects, and one pair of shoes, because by that time our clothes had been scattered from Clark Field all the way up and down the island, the peninsula, because I had been in the hospital and lost about everything as far as clothes was concerned. So that left the majority of us with mostly just the clothes on our back. A few personal items, as I said, mess kits and billfolds and watches.
Were any of your buddies with you at the time that this happened?
Yes. There was 4 or 5 on my gun crew that we stuck together until we got out to where this rice paddy was. We started to assemble in a big group when the Japs come along. Then when the Jap infantry come along, they started lining us up, going down through the rows, lining us up and setting us on the ground.
Making us sit down?
Making us sit down cross-legged with their arms folded, going up and down the rows, robbing everybody of their personal effects, watches, rings, billfolds, what have you. And if you wasn't far enough back in the group to hide it somewhere, you lost it right there on April the 9th, because the Japs come through and robbed everybody that they could. And the ones that resisted, they treated them with a rifle butt.
Was this organized? This taking this stuff away, was this organized, or did they just a bunch of infantrymen come through and on their own take this, or was this an organized robbery?
To me, after analyzing all of this, it was nothing but organized thievery. They had done it all through China, and they'd done it all the way down Luzon, there in the Philippines. They had no respect for anyone that was a prisoner.
Did they make you put your stuff out in front of you, or how did they know you had it?
The only thing that they robbed right there was what they could see out. Your wristwatch or your rings, or take your billfold. They knew we all had billfolds. And they would go through that and take what they wanted out of it. Usually it was the whole billfold. But then if you fought it back in a group, you was able to see that, and you could kind of hide it, set on it, or something, part of what you had, that you could, was managed, because some of the people, the Americans, managed to have part of their personal effects by the time they got to the prison camp at Camp O'Donnell.
Were you able to save anything?
Pardon?
Were you able to save anything?
No.
They took everything?
Everything I had.
All right. What kind of a day was it? Was it a hot, miserable day?
It was a very hot, miserable day. We ran out of water before noon, so each one of us brought a canteen with us, had some water in it. By noon we were out of water, and there was no place that we could get water. Besides that, the Japs wouldn't let us move out of the group, because we had to stay there in that group, the group that I'm with, until the next day, without food or water.
What did you do about sanitation? Where you just had to sit in that position?
You just had to sit there, because the Japs was the victor, and they showed us that they were superior to us, that we would sit there and do all that. So nobody went anyplace. You just sat there and done what you had to until the next day.
How'd you spend the night?
Huddled together on this rice paddy with nobody thought or even brought blankets with them. We were just ordered to go out to where we could surrender to the Japanese, which was a great mistake. On April the 10th, some of the Japs come along and started forming what turned out to be the Bataan Death March. They lined us up.
Were these infantry?
They were Japanese infantry. Had the job of taking care of the prisoners of war right at that time. However, it was turned over to another general in a week or two after Bataan fell or was surrendered. They started walking us up this highway.
Let me interrupt you here, Bill. What about your officers? Did they separate the officers from the enlisted men?
No, sir. The
They were all
Japanese
treated alike.
did not recognize American officer. They were treated just as bad, in some cases worse, than a private. They showed no respect to any American human being, because they were at that time going full blast. They was going to conquer the world, if you remember.
All right, now, you're telling about organizing the Death March. How'd they go about doing that?
They came along, they put everybody in a column of fours. They made 4 columns. Just lined them up on the road. As they come up the road, they see a few more prisoners over here. You fell in anywhere you could with this group. Here it was, the heat of the day, no water, no food for 24 hours, already starved and sick. So we start up the road the best we know how. And the Japanese was bringing in everything they could bring down to the tail end of Bataan, so they could set up fortification to blow Corregidor out of the water. So we had to contend on a narrow gravel road with all the artillery, the tanks, the trucks, and everything, headed down the peninsula as we was trying to walk out of the peninsula towards San Fernando. We would walk for as long as we could, and then a little longer, because you didn't fall out, but that's where they killed you. If you
What do you mean? If you fall out, what would they do?
well, they either beat you, bayonet you, or something. So,
Did you see that happen?
no, I was lucky I didn't see that.
Now, you must have gotten water and food somewhere along the line here.
The only way that you could get any water was try to scoop up some out of a side ditch without a Jap guard seeing you. Because if he did, he'd seen you. They had 1 or 2 artesian wells along this road. Now this is hearsay, I did not see it. They marched the guys to the artesian well, and all that started towards the well to get it, the Japanese shot and killed. So it didn't take long to know that you couldn't get water out of that well. However,
No, that was hearsay, though. You didn't see
I
it.
didn't actually see that.
Okay.
However, I did see a lot of beatings on this 7 days from Bataan to the Camp O'Donnell. That was up in Tarlac province on Luzon. The Japanese decided to make that Filipino training camp, a prison camp for all the Japanese, or all the Filipinos and American prisoners. So we left out, kept going on this death march. At night, they stopped on the side of the road or somewhere where they could kind of watch us without any way of giving us anything to eat. One night, we got to stay in a little town at the edge of San Fernando before we got to there. In an old Philippine Army built it, and they gave us a small bowl of rice. That's the first rice we had had in the group I was in 4 days. So we made a couple of more days, and we got into San Fernando the same way, without water, without food. I went to the railroad yards. They loaded us in railroad cars. The Philippine Railroad is smaller railroad cars than the United States, but cars would hold 100 men standing up. They filled it plumb full, shut the doors, and it had taken us about 5 hours to get up to Tarlac.
Tarlac?
Tarlac.
T-A-R-L-A-C-K or?
T-A-R-L-I-C-K. I believe they
Tarlac.
pronounce it.
Okay.
Tarlac. And that was 6 kilometers from Camp O'Donnell, which was the prison camp. That's where they took the train loads of prisoners up to Tarlac, unloaded us, and we walked the 6 kilometers.
Were you forced to stand up then in the cars?
Well, in a way it was forced, but we packed so hard, or solid, that you couldn't fall down. And everybody, the diarrhea, dysentery, sweating, the smell got so horrible in there in that 5 hours that it was unbelievable. So when we got to Tarlac, and the doors came open, it was no problem to get the 100 to fall out. A lot of them literally fell out because it was a breath of fresh air. So we go to this, walk this 6 kilometers to Camp O'Donnell, to the prison camp. We go in. As we come in, everybody is lined up, interrogated, stripped, searched, robbed, and divided to different sides of the road. On the left side of this road was all Filipino prisoners. Now, on the right side of
Well, let's stop here a minute. Had you had you had much contact with the Filipinos up to this point?
No, the group I was in, other than at San Fernando, yes, there was a lot of Filipino people there, but not as soldiers. They were occupied Japanese town. The Filipinos was very afraid of the Japanese or the treatment they'd get. However, a lot, when they could, the Japanese people was still sympathetic to the Americans, and they slipped food.
You mean the Filipinos were?
Yes, I mean, yes.
Okay.
The Filipinos was very sympathetic to the American soldier. And when they could, they would slip you something to eat or water or anything.
Did they do that while you were on the Death March?
Yes, a few places up and down the road when we come to these little barrios that they call, or we call little towns here. But I wasn't ever fortunate enough to be at the right place to get something to eat.
All right.
But when we did, as I said, got to Camp O'Donnell, and all the Americans were, that's where the Japanese had separated the Philippines and the Americans. And said they interrogated everybody, robbed everybody that had anything that.
How did they interrogate you? Did they have interpreters that could do that?
Oh yeah, yeah. They're good at that because they have good Japanese interpreters. They ask you all the questions of where you lived, where you were born, what outfit you was in, and the whole rigmarole from A to Z, and then sent you across the road.
Well, now, in the service, you're supposed to give your name, rank, and serial number. Well, did they go beyond that?
They just laughed at that after you said that.
Okay.
And they could persuade you right quick that you had to say whatever you possibly could say.
How would they persuade you?
Rifle butts, bamboo poles. You can take a bamboo pole and fix it right and beat a man to death and you never know he's been hit. But anyhow, here we are in Camp O'Donnell. I meet up with some that ahead of me, of my outfit, some that knew, and they said, our lieutenant has been shot. Well, what? It seemed like our lieutenant, when he come through San Fernando, he and another officer was able to buy some food from Filipino, and they gave him back Japanese occupied change in money for his American Filipino money. And when they got there, the Japanese would not accept that, so they marked the 3 officers down over the hill, dug their graves, and shot them, and they were buried there for things that they did. They was honest. They had traded their money, and the Japanese stole their money, but it was different because the Japanese was captors.
Now, have you come to the end of the Death March when you get to Camp O'Donnell?
Right, the first Death March.
Okay.
That was one on Bataan, for all the people on Bataan.
Now, you have described a lot of cruelty. Did you personally observe these cruel acts, or was it a lot of hearsay? Or, I mean...
All except the shooting at the water fountain, I observed. That was all, the only part of that was hearsay.
What acts of cruelty, for example, did you see?
Trucks going down the road as we was coming out. The Japanese held out guns, boards, or anything to strike the row of prisoners marching up the road, knocking them down. And I always managed to be on the outside of this 4 abreast, because the worst I could get there would be shoved into the ditch and knocked down or brained with a board or a gun from the Japs coming down the highway. The Japanese, to start with cruelty, right before we even left, we had one fella from WWII that didn't want to give up his wristwatch and wallet. And right there, we got our first lesson in how good the Japanese was with the rifle butt and the rifle barrel, because he beat him until he handed everything he had over to him. Then it was no big problem for, hey, you got one of two choices. Let him rob you or he's going to kill you.
Yeah, okay. Well, now, any other, did you see any men killed yourself?
I did not.
Were there people falling out and dying as you went along?
Yes. I seen a few dead bodies on the side. The number I don't remember, but I did not see how they were killed or died from exposure or
what about the dysentery? Did you have a lot of dysentery?
I would say 75–80% of the Filipinos and American soldiers had malaria and dysentery before they were taken prisoners. So we had constant dysentery. I had chronic dysentery for 3.5 years.
Now, we're up at Camp O'Donnell. Tell us what happened after that.
Okay. The first thing we got there, they needed a burial detail.
A barrel?
A burial.
Oh, burial
To
detail.
bury the people that had died in camp. Because the Americans were dying from lack of medicine, starvation, what have you, at the rate of 50 every 24 hours. So it took a lot of digging to bury that many people. But by the time I had got there, there had been so many died that at just outside the open wire fence where the Japs started the burial, they were digging their graveyard. They would take a work detail out the graveyard. We would dig the hole 6 foot long, 2 feet deep, and just start digging all day long. And they would bring bodies out and throw them in these holes, or in this one hole. In other words, it was a group burial each day. Whatever time
They use any lime or anything, or just burial?
we didn't have anything but a shovel and a wheelbarrow to keep from falling in ourselves. Okay? Very few of the corpse had any ID or whatever on them when they stowed in that hole. Now, as I said, the Americans died in 50 days. And down this same road, the Filipinos was dying at the rate of 250 every day. And they was burying them just to the side of where the Americans were burying theirs, outside the dig, the barbed wire enclosure.
Yeah.
And I was on work the very detail 2 days. And, well, this is not any good. And if you want to leave, you're going to have to get out of here. So, I guess the good Lord heard me, because the next day they needed a work detail, mechanical detail, to go to Tarlac.
Well, let me interrupt you here,
Okay.
Bill. You say they needed it. Did they put Americans in charge of Americans, or were the Japanese just giving these orders?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't make that specific. No way would a Japanese allow an American to have any say-so or authority at that time.
Okay.
The Japs, when I say they asked for details was the Japanese commandant of Camp O'Donnell. He would get an order in from somebody down the Japanese command that they needed a detail at X spot. So many men to go out to this working detail. Different places, because they were using the nearest able-bodied Americans to go back down in Bataan, Bataan and the Philippines to salvage everything that the Americans had left and rebuild Clark Air Base. And anything that they could use for slave labor, the ones in better health went out, which in most of the cases was a blessing, because on a lot of these details, you were bound to see a Filipino somewhere that would be sympathetic enough to help you with something. So, this day, as I said, they needed 6 men, an officer, American officer, and 5 men to go to Tarlac to service the truck that was bringing food to O'Donnell Prison. So there we get into the first time since we surrendered that the Japanese recognized the difference between an officer and an enlisted man.
Okay, so the American officer was in charge.
He was in charge of the group under the Japanese at this little work detail.
Okay.
Of course, he had no authority other than he was an American officer with 5 men. And that was a lot better than being in this camp, because when you laid down in O'Donnell, you didn't know who or how many was going to be dead the next morning in the barracks you was in. So get out there, besides being able to get adequate water at cabins, it was versus into the camp, O'Donnell. You had to wait and get some water, but we could, besides have drinking water, we could keep clean. We did eat a little better because such a small detail, these Japanese was could get a little bit more, or some respect.
The question I have as you go along here, you speak of all these Japanese as cruel and inhuman, but by this time had you met any Japanese that might have been a little sympathetic to you or a little kinder than the rest of them?
I guess I could see your point. However, at that time, after going through what we did, I believe we were so filled with hatred that it was almost impossible to recognize a good Japanese above a bad one. However, at this detail, with such a small group, we did not have the higher-up Japanese officers looking down these Japanese throats. So yes, consequently, this group was a little bit better. They were a lot better than the soldiers that brought us out of Bataan. But then we were still showed and treated as prisoners of war.
How were the sleeping conditions, for example? Did you get any shelter at night? Have any blankets?
At Camp O'Donnell, we had a roof overhead, but there was no blankets, nothing in the way of what clothes you come into camp with. It's what you, that's all you had. Now, although at Tarlac, we sat inside of an old schoolhouse. And yes, we did have a blanket there, and we had a rice pillow.
A rice pillow?
A pillow made out of a husk of rice.
Oh, okay.
That's what they, instead of having something like we stuff our pillows with, theirs was filled with rice hulls. Okay? In about 2 weeks at that place, my dengue fever come back.
Dengue.
Dengue fever.
You didn't tell us you had it before.
Well, I've had time to think over this one of the things that I forgot to put in.
Yeah.
Okay, you should see my computer. Okay, now, the Japanese, as I said, was more sympathetic than anywhere else. So they take me back to O'Donnell. And I can't lay down in here and die. And of course, dengue fever has a cycle, a way of going through a cycle, with or without medicine. So when I got to feeling better, I went up to the commandant and wanted to go back to my work detail. No way. So I put up with that a day or so. And so help me, at noon one day, I still don't know why I did, but I walked right out through the gate, 6 kilometers, to this schoolhouse where my lieutenant and 4 other guys were, and 3 Japanese. And I know that that Japanese was more scared than I was, because he wanted to know how I got there. I told him I'd just come out the gate and come out. Well, they would kill me unless he could fix it over. So, anyhow, consequently, the Japs didn't kill me and I stayed on the detail.
Did you, but you mentioned the dengue fever. When did you first contract the dengue fever?
Well, I had the dengue fever before Christmas in 41.
Oh.
While I was still in service, because I had contact both dengue fever and malaria, and I had it intermittently all that time.
Was that pretty common among the servicemen over there in the Philippines?
Yes, it was very common there.
All right, well, go ahead. We're back on this detail.
Okay, I get back to the detail, which made me feel so much better, because I'm out of this camp. I can get water to wash in, a mosquito bar to sleep under at night, which they had got for us, a little bit more to eat, and yes, these few Japanese was what I would say kind. But we stayed there and worked that detail until after Craigerdor fell, which they fell on May the 6th. At that time they had fell when I was out on the detail, but we did not know that. So they had so many deaths at Camp O'Donnell from the Filipinos and Americans, and they had started another large, huge prisoner of war camp at Cabana de Juan. That was...
You've got to go slow on that one.
Cabana de Juan.
Okay.
Now, I can't spell it right now, but then that is the name. And it was on the Bataan River. All right. As I said, the few survivors that was left at O'Donnell, when they brought all the prisoners off of Craigerdor to Cabana de Juan, they closed down the American side of the Camp O'Donnell prison camp and moved them to Cabana de Juan. So consequently, our detail was no longer needed. They moved us to Cabana de Juan. Went in there. So I've seen several that I had thought was gone, talked to different ones. Well, this fellow's out on detail or something. So now this was about the middle of September in 42.
Okay.
When we left Tarlac province to go to Cabana de Juan. We got there, conditions not much better, but we did have water at that place. The food was about the same, whatever they could get, very scarce. And they would call details this, details that. So one day, scuttle come down. Now this was in about the 3rd week of October of 42, that they wanted 800 men detailed. So this next morning I got there. I wanted to go out on that detail. And they counted off 800 men, took us up to the railroad, which was only about 7 or 8 kilometers from the camp, took us into Manila, put us in Bilibid prison, which Bilibid prison in Manila is what we would say Leavenworth. It was a federal penitentiary under the...
Was it a kind of a dungeon?
Well, they did have, but then it was a big, well-built security place. So we got there that day. They come around that night, give everybody a brand new pair of GI shoes, a new pair of khaki shorts, and a white t-shirt. Boy, was our morale high. Here we got new clothes, new shoes. We had to be going home.
What about your, had your shoes worn out by this time that you had before?
Well, we had no shoes, other than what we could make. Salvage. Maybe cut the soles off the wore out shoes, or pick up a discarded rubber tire, or a piece of board that you could make tie on your feet to keep them going. Was basically our footwear, because that time it was completely wore out and gone. But when we get in there, and I say we got our ration, we're going to go home. Well, the next morning we got another bowl of rice. And we walked down to Pier 1. That's where everybody loaded up to get on the ship to go someplace. Well, they put us back in the building. So down ahead of us, as we was coming in, we seen other people going up gangplanks. Of course, in a group like that, you can have all kinds of rumors. Directly come our turn. Well, they come in and start us up a gangplank. Up the gangplank on deck, down a hole. If you mentioned a dungeon a minute ago. That was it. Because they went in this Japanese ship and jumped in a second deck. Like about halfway up this wall. They had used this ship to move the cavalry. Horse ship and everything else in it. But they put in another deck, kept shoving us in. Laying down, or setting down all the way around this whole thing. They put 400 in this hole.
In the hole?
In this hole. Closed the lid. Well, we were still in the tropics, the Philippines. It's hot. There's no air conditioning. So what do? You go to sweat. You drink what little bit of water you have. Holler for more. Nobody hears you. So they get ready. We didn't know it, but they had filled another hole on this ship with the other 400 men to come in that group.
Yeah.
From Bilibid. Okay, we could tell the ship was moving. And we waited, and we was in there about 24 hours before they opened the hatch. They sent down 5-gallon buckets for toilet facilities. By that time, everybody had messed all over themselves, all over the place, and it was almost unbelievable, the smell. And they set down a bucket of rice. If you were lucky enough to get towards the front end, you could get you a handful of rice. Otherwise, you went out hunger alone. And people actually fought to go up this ladder with that bucket of waste to throw it over the side to get a breath of fresh air. But as I said, that was the last week in October that we set sail. In about 5 or 6 days, the ship pulled in to what at that time was called Formosa Bay, and they led us up on, which now is called Taiwan. But they led us up on top. One of the American officers in the group talked and talked till they got permission to take us up on the deck for a little bit of fresh air before they sent us back. Well, from where the ship was anchored, out across the harbor, we seen a great big Red Cross hospital ship. But Japanese soldiers was going up that gangplank. It wasn't civilians. It was full-back Japanese field soldiers. That's how they transported in China Sea on Red Cross ships. Well, we spent a couple of days here, and we had, of course, we were down in the hold nearly all the time. Get out once in a while. We started on another voyage. In about 2 weeks, we only lost one in our front hold. And we talked, or say we, the American captain, talked the Japanese in, letting us come up on deck to see them throw him overboard. That's the first time I'd seen somebody buried at sea. Of course, all they done was, when they up on the deck, put him on a board, tied him to it, tied some weight on his feet, hitched him over, and that was it. Well, that was the end of the funeral. We went downstairs again, putting up with 2 little helpings of rice per day, and we would have to take turns taking canteens out the hold one at a time, would take all they could carry to get a supply of drinking water. So on the night before Thanksgiving, 1942, this ship docked at Yokohama with all of us on board. And as they come out, as we come out of this hole on the Japanese ship, going down the gangplank, whoop, back up a minute. Down in this hole, as I said, I had that new t-shirt on. And I felt something up here. I felt it again. I pinched it. Third time I looked at it. I had never seen a louse, but I knew what it was. So I pinched it and thought, well, if they find out I look this way and that way, and these guys feel out I'm lousy, they'll kill me sure. But everybody had lice. So now, we go down the gangplank. Down at the bottom, there's a Japanese soldier on this side with a 5-gallon sprayer delousing us. It was nothing but a cold bath, because it didn't kill the lice. And the one on this side handed each individual, as they come down, a little board like a lath, piece of board, lath, about 1.5 inches wide, 2.5 inches long, with a number on it. which my number happened to be 201. In Japanese, that was Ni-aka Ichi, which for 33 months in Japan, that was my name to the Japanese, Ni-aka Ichi.
Ni-aka Ichi.
Right. That means 201.
Okay.
Now, so we get on the train that night. On Thanksgiving Day of 1942, the 400 of us arrived in Yodogawa Bunsho, Osaka, in a steel mill, smelting plant, a rolling mill. And that's where us 400 would be used as labor in this plant. But as the Japanese, they weren't ready for us. So we slept on the cinder ground that night. And with no cooking facilities, they hand out a little bit of rice and whatnot. But in about a week, they had a place, what I've often thought of the hayloft, in the top of one of these buildings. It was about 75 feet wide, 150 feet long. They jumped in a second floor, 19 steps up that to that second floor. 30 months of 19 steps up that stairway to that floor. And here we are, 400 foreigners in Japan, scared to death. The guards was worse yet than we've ever seen, because we found out over a period of 33 months that our guards in Japan was what we would call disabled soldiers. They had been hurt somewhere, so they naturally had a ill feeling towards anybody that had been or ever thought about being their enemy, treated us as such. So, in the first 3 months, in this week, they got us up in this loft. We slept on the floor, but they did issue us 5 little sheet blankets each, and a rice pillow, which we doubled up, 2 together. That gave us 10 little sheet blankets to roll up in. Now, in November, in Osaka, isn't too cold all the time we were there. However, coming out of the Philippines, when we had already lost a fourth to a third of our original weight.
What did you start out at when you, what weight were you when you went into service?
When I went into service, I weighed 165 pounds, physical fit, as there ever was of anybody in the United States.
And what were you by this time? You probably don't even know.
I don't know then. The only time that I know, I weighed 92 pounds when I was liberated 3.5 years after taking prisoner.
Okay, you're up in this loft.
We're up in this loft. Okay, they allowed us one stove that we made out of a barrel in this 75 to 100 foot building to heat the whole thing. We could burn it 1 hour of an evening, which was nothing. So when we come in from work detail, we covered up in our blankets. When I say work detail, over this factory, they divided us up to some of us on the steel rolling mills, some of us on what they call a umpan, which is nothing but lifting labor, some stamping mill, some of the galvanized part of it, some of the roller end of it. Various places in this whole complex, we were divided up. And in Japan, their philosophy was Shikodo nai, meshi nai. Work not, eat not. Okay? The first 90 days that we were there, 112 died from malnutrition, exposure, lack of medicine, which didn't bother the Japanese. They just cremated you and sent you a little jar somewhere. So, as I said, the first 6 or 8 months there, we were scared. We didn't know what to do. So at that time, working with the same group of Japanese civilians, getting back to the question you asked me, yes, we commenced to find some of the Japanese civilians wasn't exactly sympathetic. However, they were not brutal to us as Americans. See?
Yeah.
So we were trying to barter or do anything on the black market with them that we could get, because after we'd been there about 3 months, the Japanese decided to pay us. They give each non-com, which I was a sergeant, $1.50 a month, 10 cigarettes a month, and they give a private 1 yen a month and 5 cigarettes a month. That was your pay. Now we worked 6 days a week, but we couldn't have Sunday off because that is a Christian day. We had Wednesday off. We had to work Sunday.
Were you a smoker?
At that time, no. Oh, yeah, when I was a young guy, on Saturday night I might smoke a cigarette or two to think I was grown up, but no, I was not a smoker.
So those cigarettes were like money to you?
They were better than money, because people with the habit would trade their rice off for weeks at a time. You could take those those cigarettes and cut them in 3 pieces. That made 3 smokes. That each one of those pieces was worth a half a bowl of rice. That somebody that had the habit would give his rice for that cigarette. Well, with the skinny bowl of rice you had, and a half more was better than what you had. Or you could loan them out cigarettes for cigarettes back on Easter time. Like I guess you'd call it the shysters in Chicago.
That's a barter system.
The barter system.
I think we all went through that in the Army.
Okay. All right. We learned right quick how to survive with what you had. So I got into the cigarette business, loan business, trade for rice, and working. Now, I was taught Japanese to a degree in one class. That's very difficult to comprehend. But I guess the Japanese liked me when we got up into this new building, because they made me a squad leader. Being a sergeant, knucklehead, not knowing much. So here comes this morning and night. We had roll call in Japanese language, not English. Even though the Japanese talking to us probably could talk better Japanese or better English than I could. But that would be degrading to him. So, come up here. They told me how, in Japanese, what squad member I was, that I was honcho, that how many guys I had with me in my squad, and that they would count down. Now this is English I'm giving. But they would say, tell me to Hanasu, I was Ichiban, honcho, to report that they were either all Doko or whatever ones were Byoki, which is sick in a bag, or once in a while one would be Shikodo.
What does that mean?
Work. Shikodo is work.
Okay.
See? So then I would tell them to bungo, which is the same as count off, and they would count ich, ni, san, si, go, roku, si, hashi, ku, chu, juichi, juni, jusan, jusi. Okay, I had 16 men. So we done that for 33 months, all in Japanese. And I know the day that we were liberated, if I'd lined my squad up and said count off, it would took them 30 minutes to count 16 numbers. Because it was drilled into them.
All they knew was Japanese.
Okay, now, we're still in this factory. Because we've been there a while, we get more brave. As I said, the civilians is not as brutal as the soldiers. We get where we can talk with them. And I can't talk good, but I can talk fair to get to know what I'm doing. And some of the guys in there, in the group of prisoners, could really speak good Japanese. Now they got along great, but we were out in this group of making deals we could and whatnot, and I guess by about the first 8-9 months, they come in now to the question you asked me. They made a difference between officers and enlisted men. But we had there, all that time, the officers had worked right alongside with us in the factory until this date. Then they come in, all officers, lieutenant, second lieutenant up, would leave the camp at Yodogawa Buncho, Osaka. So they left 2 majors, about 3 captains, and 4 lieutenants in Yodogawa Buncho, Osaka. As the rest went someplace else, we knew not where at the time. From that day on, the officers didn't work out in the factory. They stayed in the building. Got to treat them a little bit more like officers are supposed to be.
Yeah.
Taught. Okay. So we get better and get better. And on May the 11th in 1943, in the middle of the afternoon, they come around and all American prisoners go back to the compound. One thing I should before I get back in the compound. These new GI shoes that we got Japan with, we had to take them off so the Japanese couldn't see them. And they were stored in this big building. So we were wearing their tennis shoes. Okay, that brings us up to May the 11th, 1943, when they brought us back in the middle afternoon. Boy, we felt good. Something going to happen good. But when we got up to the compound gate to come open, everyone ahead of us was in there naked, down on their knees with their hands behind their head. Ooh, what in the hell is going wrong now? Well, we done the same thing. We had to strip down their birthday suits, get out on them senders, their hands behind their head. They'd come along and thump you with this bamboo pole, this, that, and the other. The group that I was in, they didn't interrogate much. Just banged around with it. But anyhow, about 9 o'clock that night, at the time that the mosquitoes was about to eat us up, the major somehow or another convinced the Japanese to let us put our clothes on and go in the building. Well, then we got in and got what the scuttle was. The Japanese police out had found a Japanese that had bought some GI shoes from a prisoner, and they was trying to find who that prisoner was.
Oh.
Now this is not a reflection on nationalities or whatnot, because the little devil was good, a little Jew boy, the best guy in this world for a friend or whatever. And he learned Japanese well. He had carried 400 pairs of shoes out of that compound and traded or sold to that Japanese for his own benefit, because we always wondered how he had money to buy all kind of extra stuff to eat. And that little rascal was almost as fat as a pig. The rest of it was starved to death. But I don't hold him against that. Well, he was surviving. So, they never did find out.
Who did it, huh?
The Japanese did. They never found out who done it. Of course, we did inside. We got to know who it was. But anyhow, as I said, we got to being a little more brave all the time. So that 33 months in Japan, by getting there in the wintertime, left us in Osaka 3 winters. Which, by the 3rd winter, we got brave enough, we had carried enough old barrels out and made stoves. And pig iron smelter had been down for the month of January in 45. And by February, when it was repaired, they didn't have enough coke left to fire it up, because we carried it all in and put it in our van. The chaps guards didn't care, because they was carrying it from us. So, well, yeah, go ahead and take it, we got enough. But there at night, we slept good that 3rd winter. In the meantime, sometime along after the 43 incident with the shoes, we got to talking with different ones of Japanese, and they was telling us about an English print newspaper. Well, we bought 1 or 2 and found out the Japanese was taking advantage of us. We wanted the paper, but they was robbing us. So anyhow, 10 of us non-coms got together and pooled our money. And we found right quick there's no need of buying that paper unless we could read the tempo of the guards, because it was the same old thing. But when the guards come up in the morning, hollering and yelling and beating everybody, we knew something had went wrong with the Japanese army out in the field. So
this was when?
This was starting in real late 43.
Okay.
Because it took us that long to get brave enough and to find a contact that would bring us a paper without feeling like they would get shot for treason. Japanese guard. Okay. So all through 44, the first 3 months of 45, we had the best news coverage over there, better in the Pacific War than the people right here in the United States. I know, because I know propaganda from both sides.
Well, now, how were you getting this news? What do you mean?
We would get this Japanese to buy us an English print paper, read it to it. Once in a while we'd find the Japanese would talk a little. And they got to tell you, it was very easy to tell every battle they won going south towards Australia, Japanese in this paper. But when they got to losing the Philippines, and then occasionally we would have an airplane come over Japan, down the Honshu, Osaka, then they had to go to telling the Japanese people the truth. Because up until, I don't think, other than that publicity stunt of General Doolittle, there was no planes to speak of over on Honshu until till the middle of 44. Then they got to be coming back up enough that you got talking about B-29s. The prisoners had no idea what a B-29 was, because the last we knew anything, a B-17 was a flying fortress. And the Japanese talking about these B-29s that could fly high.
Now, did you feel a change in the attitude of the Japanese people as this was happening?
No, they never give up until later, because they were still, as I said, the civilians were getting where they would tolerate us and we tolerated them, because we had to work side by side. So, okay, on April, now as the airplanes started coming in, so that we'd get these reports that they had lost some islands down in the south that given the planes close enough base that they could fly in and bomb Japan. Getting horrible. So they kept picking up. We could find out. Well, when the Americans took Saipan, when they took Leyte, all the battles was coming through. When they come back in and took the Philippines, we knew that. Because we got more planes. And then on April the 30th, in 1945, about 7 o'clock at night, in Yodogawa, Bunchu, Osaka, the air raid siren come on, and it never went off until the next morning at daylight. We heard bombs falling all night long. Now, when the planes started coming in, the Japs made us build a bomb shelter, which was nothing but reams of barrels setting up, ashes in them, some 4x4s stowed over the top, sheet metal, some ashes on that. And the bombs got close enough to vibrate the ground, it trickled down in on us. But there was 161 of us left out of that 400. Still left in Osaka. The next morning, anytime during that night, if there had been a bomb dropped right there and killed everyone in that bomb but 2, they'd have both jumped up and said, that's what we've been waiting on.
Huh.
That's how.
You're so glad to see that.
That's right, to see that we're really making progress. Okay, the next day, they loaded the whole group of us 161 on a train and sent us out of Osaka, Yodogawa, Bunchu, Osaka, which we were very fortunate. They sent us over on the other side of the island, a little place I'm sure you call Oyama.
Well, how do you spell that? Or how do you spell
O-Y-M-A, Oyama, the way I pronounce it, Japanese. But anyhow, it was in a nickel mine smelter. And we got to this camp. There was some Australians there. There was some English there in this camp, and a few Americans. But when we got there, we lost all of our news reports.
Yeah.
Because the ones in this nickel smelter, they wasn't near friendly like the ones we had just left. Another thing probably because we were just new. They didn't want to get to know too close to us. But anyhow, was in this camp. We worked in this nickel smelter, various details and whatnot. I was still a group leader. They had myself, a fellow by the name of Campbell, put us in a machine shop for repair the big rock crushers and everything in the whole smelter. We had 3 Japanese adults and 1 Japanese boy working. We worked under them, doing what they wanted to. So we done everything. And at noon, we would go out of this factory down a little ways to a compound so we could eat our little skinny bowl of rice. And then come back and go to work. So this day, August the 16th in 1945, when we started to lunch, the little Japanese boy told Campbell and I that they had to go talk or listen to the emperor make a speech. So, okay, we go on, everybody goes down and eat their scanty bowl of rice, and the guards got tired of waiting on us, sent us back to our workplaces. Campbell and I went back to the machine shop, sat around a while. Draft Pete come back and said, Campbell said, Bill, whatever, don't mess up the season, because these Japs come back crying.
They came back crying?
They came back, adult Japanese came back crying. See. Well, I don't intend to. Directly comes this little boy back. He comes back. Now Campbell could talk better Japanese than I could, but I can understand what he's saying. Campbell got to questioning, hey, what's going on? Well, tell you what, the Japanese decided to quit fighting. Oh no, me and Campbell. We beat the hell out of you. He kind of ran. No, we lost the war, or we lost the battle. You're talking about Japanese. Lost the battle, but they won the war. Well, just how in the hell did you do that, you little smart aleck? And he still grinned. He was good-natured. Here, two guys was growing up, everything. That he said like this: first, you don't know our culture, which we did. They believe in a culture from the time of creation until the end of time, 100-year war. Every time they have a battle, where it be a month, a year, or 3 or 4 or 5 years, win, lose, or draw, that's chalked up. At the end of time, they have fought 100 years, but they have won their objective. Okay, now, we told that boy that he'd lost and everything. No, they won because the United States would come in there, they would rebuild Japan, they would bring him chocolate, they would bring him clothes, they'd bring him food, they'd bring him medicine. We told him how crazy he was in Japanese language. So he knew that he was understanding. And he still grinned. No, we was once crazy. You know, to this day, we were.
Well,
that boy was knew what he was talking about.
he knew what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Now, were you soon, did other Americans begin to show up and take over?
No, that is another big setback. That night we went into combat. By the time we got in to our buildings, morale was high. Nobody knowed anything. And,
let's slow up here. Let's take a brief pause here. Want to turn it off for a minute?
Well, the last day we worked for the Japs was August 16, 45. We got word in from the American people to stay in that camp until they could get transportation out. In a couple of days, they dropped more food and clothes than I thought was in the United States, right there in our one camp. You talk about eating high on the hog. We did, until September the 12th. Okay, then we take off. Now,
You came back to the States then, did you?
we went from there to the Philippines to be processed, then from the Philippines to the United States, distributed in various hospitals over the United States.
All right, now,
I was sent to Cambridge, Ohio.
I want to find out how you came to Crawfordsville, how you came to Montgomery County.
Well, that's very simple. I went to work for the state highway in 1968 when Whitcomb was made governor, and I worked at Terre Haute Highway Department for a while, and then they opened up a heavy equipment shop out here in Crawfordsville, and through Richard Howden in Crawfordsville, I was brought up here as supervisor of that heavy equipment shop, and I lived in Montgomery County nigh on to 20 years.
You mentioned earlier that your first wife died, did she?
Yes, she died of cancer here in Crawford Hospital.
And do you have any children here in Montgomery County, or do you
No.
have children?
I have 2 adopted children. They're away from here.
Okay. And you're married at the present time?
I'm married at the present time, and I have 3 stepdaughters living here in Crawfordsville.
Now, we want to get back to a couple of points. Want to get your opinion of General Douglas MacArthur, first of all.
We might ought to first notify the fire department so it won't burn up that recorder. Now, I know at one time it was hatred, but over then I have read books. I knew him in the Philippines. In my opinion, he was the worst, most reckless general the United States ever had.
What do you
He's the
think?
number one. Actually, he deprived all troops over there of medical and food because he made no provision whatsoever for the Bataan or Corregidor. And he put out orders that you couldn't do this, get your own food, you couldn't do this or do something else. He made so many blunders, and in every prisoner of war that I have talked to, which is a lot, that General MacArthur and the United States was responsible for 4 more Americans and Filipinos dying in prison camp than the Japanese. Facts number one. We went on rations the day war broke out. By the 1st of January, our medical facilities was almost to a trickle. And by the time we was over, I went into service, as I said, 168 pounds of ideal weight, build. When I come out, I weighed 92 pounds from nothing but lack of food and medicine.
All right, now, I don't mean to interrupt you, but another point we wanted to cover was escaping.
A good point. In Japan, there was no place to go. So it was almost useless to think about. In the Philippines, it was great, except one point. There was a few early did escape to the hills. One boy from my battery escaped. However, as soon as the Japanese took hold, every group, whether it's in camp, out of camp, work deals or whatnot, was put in groups of 10. Any one of the 10 messed up, escaped, the other 9 paid the price. I did not personally see anyone shot, but one boy from my company was in a group south of Manila on a work detail. There was 2 brothers on this work detail. Fortunately, they were in 2 separate groups. One of the guys in that 10 escaped. They made the other 9 dig their graves. Everybody had to stand and watch the execution. They believe it, they done it, and it's gospel truth.
Now, another question I want to ask you. What did you think of the other officers and men that you served with, Americans that you served with? How did they hold up, and what kind of people were they?
They were all great, except MacArthur I described, a major that was in the last prison camp that I was in. And I'll tell you for this one. When we were, so to speak, liberated, quit working for the Japs, the message come in for the senior American officer to take charge of the group.
And he was it.
And he was a major from the South. Nothing against the South, he just happened geographically be it from the South. Okay. The next day or two, the Japanese come up and said, hey, you can go over there to the factory and get a truck, take everybody sightseeing. Well, here comes a second lieutenant, red-headed, like I was, said, Clark, I need a truck driver and you're going to be a motor sergeant. So we go up there and get some.
I think we're going to cut that one short.
Okay.
But I want to ask you too, do you ever attend reunions of your outfit?
Yes, to a degree. However, they're getting so expensive that I cannot afford the trips, the hotel bills on the trips. It is very expensive to attend those reunions. I had just one today invited me to Nashville, Indiana, the cheapest facility there, $55 a night for me and my wife.
Now, do you still keep in touch with some of the fellows that you were with over there?
Oh yes, yes. Especially at Christmas time and different things like that. We get cards back and forth, and we see a few. Now I don't mean that I miss all of the reunions, but there's some that within driving distance of here
You go to?
that we go to and kind of keep up or talk to them on the telephone.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Now, this one question I was going to ask you, have you softened up enough now to ever buy a Toyota automobile?
Never.
Okay. Well,
Japanese owns the United States.
yeah.
Well, it is.
Well, I want to thank you. You've done a great job with, this is a lot of valuable information here.
You're welcome.
You put on the tape, and it's going to be.
Right now, I'm in the process on our